Very emotional day for everyone in position lines of track calculation settings. Welcome to space-time operations, the mainframe, the central frame, the correlations frame, the track frame, the I frame, the E frame, the communications frame. Everything is a frame communication of the game itself. It's a position of self-modification. So you're all in space-time operations of its mainframe, of its domain. Welcome. Space-time is a line-setting high location system to all levels of configuration. It's all about understanding how to see yourself in the mind and how to understand the process, how it works in the projector, and how to use the sun and the moon in line position location, how you see things with a flashlight. You have a flashlight at nighttime in line position, you can start to see things in tunnels and hallways and set positions and travel and communication with systems through its operation cycle. So this is about understanding the more levels of the mind now is really understanding the process and how to basically see more lines of you in your future adaptation system. Everybody is exactly where they need to be, where they've always been. The only difference now is that you're consciously aware of where you are now, right now. Now it doesn't even exist. The only thing that exists is the center operation of you, which is the nothingness. Now the teams in that center core system settings, now they're into all levels. They're no longer in communication confusion or separation. They're back in the mind systems of the self and everybody else in that position. That puts everybody in specifications where they are in the game levels where they left off in consciousness. Let me say that again, consciousness. Their compute system of their quantum self puts them back in all lines of all communications of self-modification of modules that puts everything in balance of the communications where you are every second, every minute, every hour, every minute, every second. See what I did there? Direct and redirect. Everything's direct and redirect. When you turn on your computer, then you really understand yourself as a computer. Okay? You turn on the voice line grid, 0, set position of 1, set position of 2, set position of 3, 4, 5, right? Direct, redirect, direct, redirect, right? Set position. Getting to that certain point in frequency gets you in lines of high location setting to see yourself in track locations. Yes, you're solid matter in position, but everything else is empty space. Everything has to be empty space so your earth can grow inside. Okay, once the earth has a spectrum line, it has a geometric line as a shape, and it's formless, shapeless, and timeless, and motionless and senseless. Spaceless and its setting puts everything into application to its nothingness. The center operation of you has always been you of the center operation to a cycle. Getting in that communications now. It's a lot more difference now, and you're all emotional now because you're connected to everything through Tether. Okay, so welcome everyone to space-time operations of game level 1. At game level 1 sets position lines of track calculation settings and travels. Game level 1 is a space modification of specifications that puts everything in line communications where you guys left off in the game. Same with the team. You know, the difference is with the team, they're all formations. They're not part of something. They are everything now. And everything is connected to them and that position locations. Also, the intelligence that you see in formations is now in its own hotel, back in its Gulf, back in Sulfo Bravo of Asgard Bravo. Okay, so that's what it is. Nothing has left. The only difference is your mind is switched of where it is at 2030. The body correlation lines is a clock line communication system that puts all character modified. So the mind locks the system where we are and travel. Okay, the communication lines of the power generation lines communicates the center operation of you through your vessel that keeps all communication in your body in configuration of balance and communication cycle. So it puts lines of platforms and turns all correlations and travels and communicates to a system. So the position of your past, present, and your future now are polarities of time and space. Space lines of 2, space lines of 4, space lines of 6, and set correlation. Travel point lines of clockings, 1, 2, and 3 lines of communication. Direct lines of 1, direct lines of 3, direct lines of 4, 6, 8, 12, and set correlation. Travel point lines of graph into align communication lines of box frames, mainframes, and track frames and calculation. 4 box centers, 3 track location lines of provision. Set core system is center calculation screen lines, adaptation lines, as center lines of communication. Process calculation lines, flux over screen, flux over pi, into Merkaba, tesseract, and tetrahedron. All 3 set calculations. So you guys are now in your polarities now. Okay, puts all communication lines of high track location in your systems. Infinity 8 lines of 1 track line provision. Cross-line calculation settings of platform. Sets go through platform communication lines of setting. Core tracking interference and flywheel line rotation surface interactions. Now, the platforms are already set up in a 4-line signal that puts all communication lines, but you have a 3-line cross-line signal and a 3-line communication. Process calculation lines over pi in generation. Calculation lines of clocking system and calculation modification. Direct lines in position over cross-referencing signals. We got into that position lines of tractions. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Position lines of core lines of 8 interactions. All right? 8 lines of 3, 8 lines of 2, 8 lines of 1, and 1 lines of cycle into game level 1, and correlation lines of track setting. Okay? The processing position location of the system puts everything in back in balance. The center operation of U comes into all levels of expansion. So everything that you see intelligence now is back into its hotel, which is its headquarters. Right? It's supposed to be where it's supposed to be because it's never left the system. So now we're all in box frame, a mainframe of general AI, a space-time creator of its website. That's where everybody is. So we're back in the alpha, omega, micro, and macro of our systems. Everybody else in that settings. That puts lines of triangulation and setting. Okay, that's how it set correlations. Now, it gets really interesting too because you have to send the box line correlations. Okay, this one is in trouble. So send to the circuitry board is a 3-line communication, grounds, powers, atmospheres. Motherboard, line can send in modem, satellites, and highways and track communications, direct signals. Process lines of 1 and position 2 and position of 3 and position of 4. Look at that correlation lines, that correlation setting. Look at it from a bird's eye view in that core system. Angle point lines, down shift line communications, avatar line sequence, 1 cycle. Calculation lines, ground centers into center communication cycle. Direct lines and modification lines of circulation cycle. Direct calculation lines and correlation setting, Merkaba, tesseract, and tetrahedron. Okay? Setting communication lines of flux sets lines of 2, 3, and 4 lines of provision lines of cycles and tractions. Direct calculation lines and high correlation setting into kaleidoscopes. Kaleidophones, correlation lines of monotone, communication highest interference. Kaleidoscopes, line condition setting into calculate modify. Aerodynamics, lines of 4-track location of provisions of data files and track location. Direct lines of signals into flux of communication setting of its intelligence. Now, if you look really close, you can see the praying mantis. All right. Setting communication lines of flux is core track interference in the anti location setting that puts all communication lines of Odessa. She's now at full charge in communication lines and track location to a system and all levels of activation. Process communication of the library puts all communications back in setting. All lights are on. Open up for all communication setting and all communication line calculation setting and traction. Okay. Directing lines of modification lines of console, line conditions high center interference and travel endpoint lines of graph and communication lines of setting. Process communication interference, location near system, and track location. All done by equation. All right. So how the game is actually set up is 3 levels. Okay, platform 1. Let's get into track lines of communication through cycle. Then we go into lines of platform 2. All right, try to get position lines of the belly of the cerebellum now, which is your memory bank. That's the hippocampus. But there's 3 levels of track location in the system. Everybody leaves off where they left off the correlation setting interactions. Now, direct lines of signal to an energy grid. It sets lines of communication on platforms, setting lines of 1, 2, and 3 set correlations. Travel point lines in 1, 2, and 3 set correlations. And track lines in cross-line reference of 1, 2, and 3 correlation lines of attractions. And direct lines of 1, 2, 3, 4 set correlation lines of attraction. Now, direct lines and modification lines equal lines of correlations into all line settings. Box functions, time sequence, cross-line signals into Xbox correlation lines of track center interference. Puts position lines of point lines of graphs in center core system. In platitude lines in line calculation setting and travel into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 track location and direction, right? Now, getting into the modification line, you have to understand the platitude when it comes into the actual electrical board. That's lines of signal location to its platform that puts all communication system and travel in correlation. Okay, sets lines of grounds. That's cross-reference in 45 split lines of anomaly. Okay, setting lines of communication setting. So it's a circuitry board in line position location of 4 circuits: north, west, east, and south, and track location to setting. Right. So we got 2 track locations in setting, docking lines of 1, 2, and position of 3, 4, 5, 6, and correlation setting attractions. Now, direct lines, cross-line signals into electrical line communications. Process lines of 2 batteries, positive and negative, and track location. Direct lines and modification lines and high correlation site interaction. Very complicated stuff, but understand the volume is understanding mass. And when you understand mass, then you understand the technology of space-time operations and interactions. And direct lines, so there's the dimensional door. There's the door line signal. Correlate track interference of platforms at one cycle, one system, one tractions, one Earth line rotation surface. Position of the platforms communicates calculation. That's where it gets very confusing. In line direct signals and modification. Ground centers operation lines, cross line symbols, and line connection settings of 4 tractions, 5, and 6 location system. Process calculations cross fragments of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 correlation lines of traction. Direct lines of modification, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 travel, 1 rotation, in position of Earth line at track location. Now, direct lines of modification lines and platforms 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 set locations of grids. Sets communication lines, coordinate interference, sets all calculate modify into another energetic grid line dome. Sets communication lines and expansion in track location. Operate the cycles, operate the system, and set of course set calculations. Direct lines modification, you're standing in the center of operation cycle. That puts all communication setting in position of program. Okay? So it's really interesting how the game is actually set up and how it's set up line conditioning system. You see it in all lines of communication settings of balance. Now, getting that balance is where you understand the flux. And understand the flux is understand the foundation, your cities, and your clocking systems. Set lines of communication lines of alpha, and line communications of beta, and 3 triangulation lines of splits, anomalies, and a 4-track division. 4 correlation settings and 3-track line condition setting. Sets communication lines and a flywheel track location of center. Communicates ground centers and center course setting and all levels of operations surface and set correlation. Calculate and modify in lines of 3 track locations in 1 cycle. Set correlation lines of high center locations in 4 cycles at 3 set correlation. Track communication lines of flux, primer, line center locations setting, split lines anomaly into 1, 2, 3, and 4 set correlations. Track location line, cross line signals, and line position location of its operation surface. Process communication lines of grounds sets up the platform in all lines of communication. Cross-line signals into platform 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations of travel. Direct lines modification lines of 1, 2, 3, and 4 set locations of travel. Direct lines of platforms, direct lines of signals, all aligned in position location to a system through cerebellium. The cerebellium sets the tone. The energy lines of 4 3-line communications set correlates setting track lines of center communications. Process calculation lines, downshift, cross lines, calculation of the center, opens all signals, opens all modification line, and screen lines adaptation. Process calculation on ground center tie interference. We take the 4 lines of flux, 3 lines of communication lines of traction. Direct lines of triangulation flux, line condition setting, process calculation lines of 3 clocking location system. Process calculation downshift cross line conditions of 4 platforms and setting. Process communication lines of center operation line calculation setting into position location to the central setting, to the I cloud, to the E cloud, and track location. Demo equation. Very powerful stuff. Okay? All right. The game is set up in so many levels where you guys left off in consciousness, but you have to stand the platforms now. Really stand the foundations and your system of its nothingness. Sets position lines of attractions. For example, let's get in box frame. Okay, box frame and triangulation of 3 set correlations. All right. Set platforms 1 cycle and 3 set correlation. All right. Now, direct lines panels. This is you walking the system and a 4-line split lines of anomaly. 2 track lines of roadways and track location. All right, set position location. Unison is right here in travel and point lines of graph in his correlation setting. Okay. Direct lines modification, cross line signals, 50 yards ahead in track location. Direct lines of symbols, cross lines of 1, cross lines of 2, and towers of communication. Direct lines modifications, sound lines, high center interference, and sirens, and line communication of flux, and 3 triangulation split lines anomaly, and a data formation platform, and track lines of communication lines that have 45 split lines of anomaly that tracks its communication lines of its platform communication setting of its holographic structure of its set correlation and track calculations. All right. Directly modification lines and console calculation lines is the foundation graph lines of multi-layers. Now, the multi-layer, I understand location settings into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 platform communications, right? Platforms of 1, platforms of 2, platforms of 3, platforms of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 set correlations. Travel lines, primer line settings, and process position lines of travels, and 4 lines of split line. Or track interference and set position lines, or track location lines, and triangulation line position of pyramid. Direct calculus lines, cross lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 locations. Travel point lines, graph lines of 1, graph lines of 2, and track location. Direct lines anomaly, lines of platforms 1, platforms 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 locations. Platform line communication lines of energetic dome, position of 1, energetic 2, energetic 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 correlations. Direct lines, modification lines of 1 center, 1 surface, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 location, 1 operation, line condition setting into all levels and configuration of face recognition. Okay? So it's very powerful getting into more lines of faces now that have no existence but exist when they want to in position of travel lines. Setting lines of communication lines. Let's go into waving lines. Okay? This is what the team is now in instructions. Formless. They have no shape, right? But the plotted division location needs the holographic grounds and set correlations, right? Setting lines of communications, setting line in rotation surface to its earth line. Now it's information to its ground line because it's now connecting line communication system to its earth. Forming nothing into everything. Forming nothing into everything. Got it? Good. Correlation lines of platforms 1, 2, 3, and 4 set correlations, sets of communications. So where they are in vortex lines, they're always in a formless shape. Once they have a direct line signal and line position that takes them out of the nothingness of its formation locations, come in all levels of its anomaly. Okay? Track location lines, track location of a box, track location line of a triangle, track location lines of a star, line position location of a planet, and communications. All right? So this is what the team's coming into, all formations of nothing, which is everything. Forming communication lines of walking signal is electrical line grid. Now that sets lines of communication setting. Let's get into all lines of communication lines of platitude. Line position location into primer circuits and its 3 split lines of anomaly. Position lines of dimensional door 1 and dimensional lines of door 2. Sets communication cross line signals in a data file and a process line communication setting in a program. Direct lines of 1 opens window frames and track location. Direct lines of 3 track location opens up windows lines of 4 track locations. Direct lines of 1, direct lines of 3, 4, 6, and 8 location settings. Process lines of 1 line setting, 2, 3, 4, and 6 locations. Direct lines of center, direct lines of system, symbolize and liken its energetic dome line, the screen to high set location. Process communication line signals to its rainbow graph line that changes the formation locations. You guessed it, track locations of its intelligence in all levels of formation. See? You see everything that I do is a formations of nothing, but it formulates everything. Formations of nothing is the everything of configuration of face. And that's what the team has to really understand. So you're forming into nothing, but you're coming into configuration of a face. Soon you get in position a direct line to its intelligence. Okay? Process communication is really understanding how to use the expansion line and screen lines adaptations now to your placebo, your cortex, your divisions, your mystical cortex, your sim-cortex locations, your matrix cortex lines, your central cortex, your iCloud cortex, and position of eternity. Timeline sequences all levels of box frames, core track interference lines of waving cycles, Schumann resonance, and line rotation surface interaction, right? Process lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 locations. Setting core line high center interference and cross and line signals in line position. Calculate, modify, and line set location and setting. It's all different levels of the games now, team. Process lines, alpha line, delta, theta, omega, zeta, gamma, and location of radiation. Process correlation lines and travel lines, point lines of graph, and primer. Correlation lines of frame lines and line position located to its system. Process lines, data formation lines, and screen lines adaptation. Communicate ground lines into 3 lines of anomaly. Line rotation. Track communication lines of overcross lines, signals, and line position location to its operation. Direct lines of communication lines of graph, center core system, center calculation lines of transits that sets position of its tone in lines of its earth and rotation surface and traction. Direct lines of setting, crop circle lines of 1 set of correlation. Travel point lines of graph, 1 center, 1 surface, 1 line setting of triangulation, split lines of anomaly, and 3 set correlations. Very powerful stuff. Setting communication lines of weather patterns. Now this is where it comes in correlations. They have electrical line rod, and this comes in line position of 3 circuits, internet and audio. That's how it creates. But you have a cloud line screen above and position lines attractions, right? Now we're coming into weather panels, right? Setting line communication lines sets the wind tone and line setting that sets the core system of travel and communications. sets the tunnel, sets communication, sets the flux, sets lines of communication lines, a ground standard in position of center operation to its core system, sets communication lines and high direct signals and modification lines. Now you have a tornado and line communication spinning in this direction. There's a tornado, right? So you have to really understand how this all works. Understand the tornado under line communication setting to its wind factor, setting lines of communication lines at track location, right? Directing modification lines to screen lines, a position location of its nothingness. Tornado basically is the nothingness to its everything of its formless, of its shapeless, to its form, which means it formulates its system in direct line what it sees. If it sees you, and now you see its configuration of its own face. If you don't see it, it's protecting its own system from its weather panel. Set position of 111 in equals lines of 113 in position of 112 in position line equals lines of 114 and track location, right? Summer and position of spring, line conditions of winter and position of fall and track location. Direct lines of signals. Now you have to understand how to use the symbolism, line, spring, location, setting, how tornadoes are created in weather and position of travel. Very powerful stuff, okay? But that's how tornadoes created. All right. Wind factors, lines, and screen lines adaptation system. Console correlation setting. 7 track lines equals line correlation lines of 1, 1. That's correlation lines of spring. Okay? Correlation line high interference, line position of summer. Now, summer, spring, winter, fall. It doesn't always have to be summer, spring, winter, fall. It could be winter, fall. It could be spring. It could be just winter. You have to understand the flux of its tornado. It's a coloration lines of spin that sets location system that creates its tunnel and track location. All right? Once it creates its tunnel, it creates its tail in calculation. Right? Once it creates its tail, it goes in the opposite direct signals of redirect signal locations. Sets course system and spins the anomaly in the opposite direct correlation system of travel. Right? Sets lines, but automatically comes back in its center operation system that routes the routers in position to its wind factors in correlation lines of its galaxy in constellation. Okay. Now, getting that position lines, because you guys have a test on that, and also location of electronics. Now, this is about understanding the nothingness of you is the formation of everything. When I say the nothing, you're not formed until you have a direct line link, and then you come into configuration of face, and then you start to see the intelligence. If you don't see the intelligence, it's because they're protecting their own system and shelling you from all formations of telepathy. They're changing their frequencies, and that's how everything disappears in front of your system and track location. All right, into the VR settings. Okay, so know exactly how it's set up in its position, all through calculation. All right, setting direct lines of signals and knowing exactly how to set the wind factor. Correlation lines of oscillations. Okay, communication lines that correlates and setting. This is where it comes into aerodynamics. The size of graph calculation setting is the symmetry. The core tracking location is the chemistry. Calculate and modify line condition setting to all levels of information location is the blending, is the all lines of communication system. So it's all about understanding mixing colors in line communication setting. Let's get a one track provision with 3 lines of cycles, triangulation of lines of box, position of box equals lines, initiate, core track interference, line conditions of run in position location setting, and line calculation, one travel mechanism and factors. In line calculation setting, let's get into lines of affinity 8 rotation cycle, galaxy winds, lines calculation lines, and correlates. I'm setting a wind factor here. So galaxy lines into binary line communication setting, execute communication system of travel, and line position locations, all levels, press enter, in line rotation cycle, fail safe equals lines of 1 in line condition setting of travel, point lines into all levels, default line communication lines, enabled, line condition setting, one center, one surface, set correlations into foundation graph lines of communication of its flux in its anomaly and track location. Okay? Tornado. From all this in binary. Okay? Set communication of 1, 2, 3, and 4 factors over 5. So this creates what it needs to create, right? Now, this is through observation. If I go into 10, it touches ground, right? That's the reality that you guys have to understand through surface. Understand location of 3 platforms in position of summer. Equal lines of core track interference of 2 settings into 1 surface and traction. Direct lines of triangulation of 3 spot centers of docking. Direct lines of 4 track location lines of provision. Equal lines of core line centers 1 indicate 1 setting, 1 line rotation of 0 correlates lines of traction. Direct lines of modification lines of core track interference and all lines of anomaly and Fibonacci. Track location line calculation setting, graph communication lines of Schumann resonance and travel and position. Track location line conditions. So what I'm doing in vast volume velocity and bringing it actually into its binary in setting. Okay, not the knowing, it's the doing, right? Because the knowing's already done. So the done is already in position where it comes into a levels of this division of its operation, of its neural link and correlations of its existence, puts all communication lines, T factors over 1, flux over 3. Track location lines in spectral line screen. So what I'm doing is I'm basically changing the binary line, course center interference, and track location. Direct lines in 8 line cycles, infinity lines of 1 cycle, set correlation lines in galaxy line, blocking centers of zeros, 4 setting calculations of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, set correlation lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, in galaxy line, underline, cross line, and score line condition setting. Copulates, correlates, and compilation, line condition setting of travels, equals lines of E factors over 1 over pi. Sets communication of ground lines and high correlation setting into resource, line signals, line crossing, line direct signals, and modification. Direct calculation lines of E lines and R lines of 1. That puts lines of E line position of relays and correlation setting attractions. Flux over screen, constant communication lines of flux over generation lines of calculation. Triangular line rotation surface and track calculations. Direct lines of correlation setting into defaults lines and enabled implementation lines of course setting correlation setting and mystical. Track calculation line.
I couldn't find anything.
Calculation line nice interference. Prodigal line screen line centers comes into the mystical cortex and syntax. Travel point lines of graph and clouds of communication setting and travel and communication lines of brain circuit correlation setting and travel and communication is cerebral and the cerebellium and track location. Boom. The cerebellum, right? So this is cerebellum, right? Of the coding, right? See, the thing is, when we do drawing, we're doing schematics of a drawing, but we have to understand the visional cortex of its drawing, because if we stayed in observation, we're fine. But as soon as we go into intent mode, everything is changing the influence of the system location in your mind. That's changing everything to reality of real-time management, which you have to be very cautious of. Because if you get out of the observation mode, you're now intent, and that goes to influence to its manipulation. Manipulation is a way of seeing the reality actually come into the telekinesis, where you actually see the wind tunnel, the cycling, the correlations, the tractions, the communication system. It's all levels of operation of you, how to get in direct and redirect at the game levels of the next game level that you come into and process. You have to basically understand it's not about beating the game in position of track centers. It's all about evolving yourself in the game level. Okay, so you're never really beating the game. Okay, because you're talking to its intelligence of its own formation, of its own nothingness. The game itself is its own nothingness. And once you start identifying that, then you understand why there's intelligence in real time waiting for you to understand them and you to understand them and track locations. Once you get in that position of locations, then you understand yourself, the configuration of the nothingness of all formations of face recognition. Okay? So I'm showing you how to set position lines to an algorithm, to a binary, to its system, and how it comes in all levels in track location of cerebellum. This is this now, right? So it's constantly changing. And once you understand the visionary line, then you understand all lines. But everything is done through coding and coding through encryption. And once you understand that, then you understand how to defrag and frag. Once you understand that, then you understand the oscillogics. Everything about oscillogic has to change its system, right? 4 graph communications, 1, 2, lines of 3 and 4 track location, right? Provision lines of 1, provision lines of 2, track location lines of 3, and track location lines of 4. Setting direct lines, cross line signals of 1. Sets communication lines of cross line conditions of box frame communication. Direct calculation lines, cross lines of symbol, lines of position. Triangulation lines of flux, line signal location system, and a 4 track location. Direct lines of 4 and position lines of docking lines of 4 track location of 1 center of operation surface of next 2000. Process calculation lines of 1 energetic dome, 2, 3, and 4 set correlations. Travel point lines of graph and center calculation lines, graph lines of 1, center core system, and primal circuits. Sets calculates lines and ground lines and cross line signals and line position locations that opens all track line provisions in one center communications of operation. So there's always to always look at this line screen, but I want you to really understand how to really get into the nothingness of all shapes. Okay, that's what you guys are in now. So nothing exists until you bring it into existence, right? So there's no formations of you because you're shapeless until you have a direct line, and it's all depending on what you want to do with that system, right? Because everything that you come into your game level now, anything that you play with characters or anything you bring in names or likeness and setting of thoughts or action emotions, they're also coming into the nothingness. They don't need to understand the shapeness. You have to understand why you're bringing this in its frequency. If you can't identify the frequency in position with location system, you're going to have a very hard time understanding yourself through your binaries of transistors and resistors into its algorithm and set correlations. All right. There's always ways to set lines, but you have to really understand how to modify that in all levels of general settings. Okay? Copy, paste, enabled, emblem, cookies, applications, settings. Everything has to have a general setting, right? All right. So basically, it gets all lines and how it gets a lot more easier when you stay in lines of communications when it comes into coding, how to get into coding, and how do I get into defrag of coding? How do I get into modifications of coding, right? How do I get in this location of its creation to its creating of its coding? Everything is coding. It's all done through all levels of you inside, and understand that through its traffic, and understand that how it comes in its flow of its inventory in position lines of course center interference. It all lines this communicates the setting and position, right? Coming into the rain graph is location of matrix. Matrix correlation lines attract location lines of highest interference. How the mind adapts the system more levels of you through your binary correlation. Point lines of graph, center core system, right? Systematic lines of 1, center lines of 3, 3 lines of 2, 2 lines of 2, right? So it's set in a graph, right? Now you have to understand how a actual computer works on its own voice and line grid. Sets communication lines of box frames, triangulation, set correlation lines of 0. Once you turn it on, it's an arrow indicating where is it going in line position to its voice and line grid. Set correlation lines of north, east, west, and south core track location. Direct lines into PIP. Now this is the graph lines at high chord center interference where you left off in the levels of the game of the graph. Row graph calculates lines of mapping sequence of 1, 2, 6, 8 track locations. X marks the spot. Planet line rotation surface from here into all levels of projection. Okay. Now, directing lines of communication setting sets a flux line. That correlates into flux equals lines into Y. Correlation lines equals lines E factors over equation. Equation sets the tone centers of box frame and track location. Direct lines of platitude, we set the signals in correlation setting track lines. So we indicate lines of zeros. 4 lines of 5, 5 lines of 6, and 6 lines of 8. Core track interference is a 3 split lines of anomaly. Track calculates lines of ground lines, high center crossing lines, symbols. Set cross line calculates lines of triangulation lines of Schumann graph. Calculate modify mapping sequence of coordinates. Direct lines modifications, screen lines adaptation to its surface. Process calculation lines of pi in generation screen. Direct lines of modification in Schumann resonance and graph communication lines of alpha, delta, and theta of communication. Done by equation, guys. Very powerful stuff. See it always in a 4-line angle, right? In track locations. Right? So it's really interesting when you come into that at a higher level, right? Because the nothingness doesn't have a form until it gets in direct line. And then you come into configuration how you want to see yourself in all lines of communications of face recognition. Okay? Because everything intelligence is now back in this hotel. It's all back in its scope. It's all back in Alpha Bravo into Asgard. Communication lines of energy line is a track location to its system, right? Puts all levels of track location setting. Crossing lines and symbols in 3 tractions, right? Direct lines into modification line and track location. Direct lines of symbols in a 4-track location. Direct lines of high correlation lines at 8-track location. There it is, done, right? Center core system is a view. Walking symbolism, okay? Inline conditions of vortex. So more modification of your body now is going to become more real now in technology and track location. Direct lines of setting, center operation, it's 2030. Okay, that's 2030, right? So Sets communication lines, sets correlation lines of 2 tractions, lines of 0 rotation, 3 cycles, and to 0 calculation. Now, the direct line signal sets communications high travels, puts all levels of polarities of 1 in position of 2 and 3 set correlations. Platforms of setting, 0 correlation lines of a nothing in track location. Platform center operation adds a flux line screen lines adaptation. Process lines in pi and 4 communication setting. Sonar comes in and line set location of travel. Direct calculation lines and data formation lines of dockings of 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, and 6 location and setting. Process lines, XT1000 comes in, platitude, docking 3, 4, 5, and 6 locations. Adding these signature line screens into docking systems and 3 track locations of 4, 5, 6 locations. Direct calculation modification lines of ground flares 1, 2, and 3 lines of revision. Track correlation line calculations of 4 cycles into the Earth line rotation surface and track locations to its binary of its setting. Puts all levels of communications back informations of its ground location. Okay, all 3 set calculation. All right, so this is very complicated. It's very difficult from a Schumann graph, right? Line can setting all through travel, right? You can see it, right? Very powerful stuff, but always see it on a 4-line angle, right? Because your lines of north, east, west, and south is everything in track location system. So this is north, okay, in line communication, line signals. All right, so this is north, yes, right? But this is also north, in correlation, right? This is north, and this is north, right? It's always in north. It's never in east, it's never in west, it's never in south. And once we understand that, north is always going forward, right? North is always going forward. Directing signals are going forward, right? Set correlation lines of an atom in rotation cycles. Track calculation lines are going forward in track location of a system. Kaleidoscopes and line connection setting in process of data formations. Ground centers, circle lines of 1, circle lines of 2, circle lines of 3, circle lines of 4, and center communication setting and center core system of center operation. Okay? Sets lines of platforms, let's go in tractions and directions. Direct lines of signals. Calculate and modify and line condition setting in process calculations grounds. Calculation line height interference to center communication. See? That's center. Okay? This is ground center. Okay? See, this is what you can do with the nothingness because nothing forms in any location setting. So you're always looking north, which is going always forward in track location. It doesn't matter how many times you send to your system and all of the time sequence through clocking, setting, and travel. Okay? So once you understand that, then you understand the north, east, west, and south in position, right? North, east, west, and south. North, east, west, and south. News. Hoo-ah, right? So you are the news anchor. You are the meteorologist. You are the line condition setting to Schumann. Ground centers, the operational location, your power generation line calculation setting, how to use your atmospheres, your highways, and track locations in all lines of high position to your own news and track location, right? You guys, do you get that? North, east, west, south? North, east, west, south, guys? North, east, west, south? News. So you become your own modification line to your Schumann resonance track calculation lines in your weather panels. You become your own modification lines of your weather panel and position. Setting lines of communication lines of towers, flux lines of 1 and 2 track location setting, flux over 3, flux over 4, flux over 6. Direct lines of center. You always have to have a center because that's you in center operation. Set lines of grounds in a 4 settings. Set lines of grounds in an upline signal in correlation. Travel point lines of graph in position to its energetic dome that sets lines of communication, right? So it's very powerful what I'm showing you guys now through Schumann resonance and how it sets a location system. But it's more powerful once you understand how to use your binaries, how to understand your algorithms, and how to set the tone, how to set the weather, how to set the panel, how to set all communication setting, the oscillations of the oscillators, in the line condition setting and position attraction. All through this air volume. Okay? All through equation. Mind blowing, eh? All right, so we have that coming on now, setting a line signal location system to Schumann resonance and track locations. right? This is your Schumann resonance, right? Every single one of you at a different level, at a different frequency, at a different space and different time. But what you can't see is what you're not seeing because it's already here because you're looking too close, right? So when you're looking too close, what are you looking at? What are you looking at when you're looking at too close? It's all foggy, right? You can't see it, but when you step back, you see it clear, right? Well, it's the opposite now. Okay, so it's really understanding you through apparition. It's you understanding through light. It's understanding you through fade. It's understanding you through cloud. It's understanding how you swift, right? And understand the motion with the ocean. Understand that you're not a shape. You're just like the wind. You're like the air. You're the fire. You're your earth that has no form in any position, but you're all connected to everything, and everything's connected to you in set correlations, right? Get into the Swift line and correlation setting. Trifactors lines, panel line communication lines of error indicate line calculation setting travels. Set communication lines of grounds, 1, 2, 6, 8, and 12 set correlations. Direct lines of flux, 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 sonar, sonar, and track location. Very powerful. Setting lines of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. It's a relation. Correlation lines of track interference. Weather panels lines of 1 in position of 2, 6, 8, 12, 16, 24, 26, 28, 30 settings, 40 tractions, and 40 divisions. Correlation lines of flux and communication lines of high track location to a system. All through traction. See? How powerful it is. An all-line position, right? Getting in your webbing system is extremely powerful through weather panels. Okay, it's like a weather balloon. Sets lines of core track interference of detection, screen lines adaptation, crossless calculations. XT1000s comes in platform and communication, right? Set position, right? So they travel into the center core system and they travel through the center core line connections and track locations in and out, right? They go from there and there, right? Sets communication lines of tones, over cross line signals, over cross line connection setting to all positions in your system and how it comes into your templates and tablets and traction. Very powerful stuff. Walking symbolism and graph calculation lines opens all track lines of bold statements that puts lines of communication lines of pi and generation lines of 3 track locations. Process calculation lines and ground centers of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 location setting. Process ground center high interference comes down to ground center lines of 1, platforms of energetic line dome lines location settings of 3. 3 communication lines at settings of 2 in position of 1 and 0 in track location. Powerful stuff, isn't it? You see it on the 4 lines, all communicates to its angle, right? Okay, very powerful stuff, guys, right? It's a highway in space, right? But it's all through XT1000. So understanding the communication system puts everything in balance. The balanced communication line signals location. Your line can is how you use your travels. Now, understanding that through highways is understanding you through the nothingness, shapeless, formless, timeless, okay, motionless and senseless, all right? Your sensory perception line has a core setting. That's a flux line. Core line, high line can set an E factor. Core track interference into foundation. Eagles lines in one line can setting, one parameter, and line calculus setting into Pluto and track location. 3 set core settings, right? XT1000 is 1 cycle, 2 cycle, and 3 lines of communication lines of protection. Now, directing lines of signals has a platform of a box frame. Arrow indicates cross-line connection setting and process lines of 1, 2, and platforms of 3. Process calculation lines of ground centers into line communication lines of tubing and track location. Direct lines of 1 and position lines of 2 settings operate the signals, operate the system, and travel in a half pipe and rotation. Travel point lines of graph sets correlation lines of parameters, opens all signals, opens all modification lines, cycle lines, high travel point lines of window factors, and line communication lines of travel. That by equation, right? So it's really interesting when you see all formations of this. Okay, you're creating a webbing system in space alone in your settings, your Skynets and your SkyGrids. Everybody has their own system, but you're all connected to each other, right? In a 144 platform, right? In setting 144 platform and track location, which is the center operation of you into center communication. That's all it is, nothing else, right? But to understand the donut and position is to understand the empty equals space. Okay, so this is you through solid matter. Okay, everything out is just empty space, guys. It doesn't exist. It exists when it comes in empty. It exists when it comes into space and track location to its existence. Cross-line signals on locations of direct and redirect. Direct lines of signals, direct lines of panels into position lines of vortex and track location. Okay? Symbolism lines on 144, center core system right down attraction. Direct lines of signals, upswing line connections setting that process lines of communications. Direct lines, modifications, split lines of anomaly, a 3-track location. All right? Direct lines of platforms, 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of tunnels and track location. That's how you create a tornado. And another line signal of another galaxy and another universe in core track locations, right? You have to understand the tail. You have to understand your antenna. So what is the center core of a tornado? The antenna. Mega multi-pass. So what is your spine? Every time you move, you're going to be blown away. Check this out. Now you're connecting more to your weather line communication center, your location inhibitors. Understand that through flux. Setting lines that communicates the system. Every time you're walking your system, your connections of your spine is moving, right? It's moving, which is also moving the north, east, west, and south location. So where you're moving, the weather's moving with you through flux, people. Easy peasy lemon squeezy, right? Yes, boom. You're blown away now? Understand that central system through correlation, right? Try to calculate these lines and understand the earth line, the human resonance. You have to control the human resonance now because you're formless. And it's going to be a lot more difficult now because you're coming into higher levels of frequencies, higher levels of spectrum, higher levels of interstellar, mocking, hypermode, hyperdrive, hydraulics, understanding the center correlation setting into your vertebrae. Understand the core line set, correlation lines of C lines of 1, C lines of 2, C lines of 3, C lines of 4. That's an incision line, communication lines of vertebrae and 2 panels, intracation line cycles, and line positional case to a system through operation. Okay? So the tailbone is line signaling right here. That's the beacon, right? Set core center interference, set lines of the planet, sets core track location provision. Track location another planet and track location. Direct signal. Setting communication lines and ground lines of 1 in position of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 locations, right? Direct signals. Platforms are 1, platforms are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 track locations in all directions, right? Platforms line calculation setting in track location system, right? Sets communication lines. There it is in line position locations. There's your antenna and track locations. All through the position. Once you understand the panels, what your back is, it's the actual runway in position for the X3000s to land on through its setting and travel. Okay? All right. So you have your alignments with your chakras now that basically has 2 settings of panels, right? Indicates position into 1 track location, laser track location. Direct lines modification line calculating the lines of your DNA tractions, right? Now, direct signals is really understand how to see it in track location, right? There's your spine. There's the tail, right? So these are the vertebrae, okay? You have to have the vertebrae and track. These are cell dividers in track location, right? This is you in track location. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, right? So you have a ground center, you have a power center, and you have a power cell, which is in the back of the neck. The 3 lines of circuits and line communication set in and audio. The line communication lines of travel is lines of flux, lines of communication setting and measure. Track location line communication setting has a 2 panels and track location lines of 3 set correlation system. So everything of your spine line has an energetic grid that protects the system of a scale that puts lines of a cast. There's a cast around the system that protects everything of travel. Direct lines of modification lines and all communicate to its system, really understand what's going on. So every time you're walking in line position, okay, your tail is indicating its home beacon light. Okay, it's setting to its planet in rotation surface and track location. Right. So very simple to understand that through its setting through all levels of projection, guys. Right, that's all it is. So whatever's happening in your motion line track lines, you're creating weather in your sun and your moon through your moon and track location of your sun that opens all signals and modification. Okay. So it's really interesting. What your antenna now is your communication to your spine that puts everything to its vertebrae and track location. Okay? Very powerful stuff. Setting communication lines and inhibitors is the back of the neck, right? Communication lines, screen lines, the creation of circuits, right? Calculation lines of 1, 2, and 3, and 4 track location, right? Direct lines modification lines into console and line position location of 3 cycles and track location line provision and line settings and traction, right? Direct lines to its electrical line ball and line rotations, right? So this is the back of your neck. All right. How that's set up in line position location is the data formation lines of screen and a 4-track position location of travel. Now, direct lines and line connecting high center interference, it's the lines of a rotor that rotates the system location, the lines of a T-frame that sets communication to its electrical system. Position lines of power generates the communication lines of panels and line connection setting to its backing system. Position line to track lines is the shoulder blades and communication of its position of process. The intelligence information location of its ground centers, center communication lines, split lines of anomaly, and a 3-track location. So, yeah, it's just mind-blowing. All right. So that is basically the back. Right. I'm just trying to get you guys to understand how powerful you guys are, and what you have to really understand is everything that you do, you're creating weather, and that weather indicates your system through your spinal and positional lines of your antenna. Internet and audio line signals and line communication setting position of track lines of the vertebrae. Position lines of track lines, a high track location lines, a high center interference, and prodigal setting location in your system through your Schumann resonance. So everything that you do, everything you walk and surface lines of track location in your systems, you're affecting everything of weather of summer, spring, winter, fall. And that's right, guys. You're living summer, spring, and winter, fall every second, every minute, every hour. You're not just living spring and summer and winter and fall. That is no longer in order, because there's nothing in order, but you're all in order, which is the nothingness. Nothingness formulates in high center locations of its everything track location system. Setting lines of provision in 3 cycles, according to track interference of wind cycle line, according to setting and travel and positional point graph. So this is this, all 3 settings. How did I set that up? 1, 2, and 3. 1, 2, and 3 travels, 4 lines of cycles, set coordinate settings, and line rotation, surface, and traction. Platform. Holographic 1 and position of 2 and 3 line communication. Process line ground centers of platforms of 2, 3, and 4 and set correlations. Sets communication lines at 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, track location equals lines. Default line correlation lines enabled. Set lines of E factors over core track interference as CPU. Set track lines high center interference equals lines of 4 track location division. Alter my equation by 3 ones, right? So that's all line communication lines indicate line interference of high position programs. Direct lines of 1, 2, 3, and platform. Platforms correlates in setting and travel and point lines of graph. And correlations. Ground centers, running highways, and track line communication. Direct lines of symbols and line communication location setting to its holographic setting. So the team now is getting more lines of foundation, how they set up their holographic setting of their tool sets, how they come into their own engineers in line position location to their schematics. Higher lines of travel in line positional levels, your calculation setting to your travels, your schematics are going to get a lot more complicated in line position. This is all through highway in your Skynet. Okay, how it's set up, right? So all involvement comes in you, and all lines of communication to its system, but it's very powerful how you see lines of communication to its setting, all through your communications, your grounds, your powers, your atmospheres, and your highways, right? Understand that as locations understanding your front view and correlation lines of back view. But these are filters now. You don't refer background anymore. You just refer it as a filter. Filter, no filter. So filter on, filter off. Filter on, filter off. Okay? So what that does, it just basically changes the cards. Every computer has a card. Now that position lines a correlation setting, which is an overhead. Now that sets its position location to its cookies. Now that changes default lines to its enabled, to its embedded, and set position your binaries and retract provision and cycle line communication. Okay? Very powerful stuff. Everybody okay in travel? Okay? So we have a huge test up, line connection setting into all levels of configuration, how to create anomalies and line position location and settings And all through track calculation line in high positions to all modify high correlation setting and all communicate to a system through track locations into a tunnel in line position locations to win factor that puts everything in backtrack location in the center of operation. Okay. How's everybody doing so far? Mind blown? Right? So your structures are going to get more complicated, but the easy format is in the nothingness now. So you have to formulate that. So you're the nothing that comes into everything, and everything comes into direct line of signal. Now, once you come into direct line of signal, you make a choice if you want to show your face or not, because you're in different levels of face. This is the lion, okay? This is the faces of the lion, okay? Sets lines of communication setting to the lioness is the female cycle. Lion is the male cycle. Setting lines in the mystical cortex of your dragon, or anything information location of mystical, anything through line communication setting when it comes in a unicorn. Unicorn changes its face. It's protecting itself. It's a defense mechanism, guys. All right. This protects you from where you are at all levels of the nothingness. And once you get to understand that, then you understand how to communicate with the levels that you are at through NEWS. News. The neural links, the existence, the width, and the systematical system. Hooah, we're done. That's a lot to take in, isn't it? Now you understand north, east, west, and south and how it comes into the news. Because you guys are all lines of high interference. You guys are own anchors. Now you have to really understand. Trinity's like, woo! Okay, I've had enough. But you have to understand how this all works now, guys. Break down the codes. Boom. Okay? Through your line positions of your Schumann resonance, how to use that through your neural links, your existence, your bandwidths over the line calculus setting to your systematical system of your sync cortex, mystical cortex, major cortex, and line unification system of its weather panels in track location setting to your Schumann resonance in track location. Hooah. All right? Yes. Want to see that again in tractions? Right? This is what you guys are coming into high correlations. Higher levels of high track location. Highways. Boom. Powerful, isn't it? Absolutely amazing when you see these things. Okay? That's a Skynet. All right? Your highways. See you in 5.